I'm very happy to open the second session of the International Conference on the Middle East. This session will deal with terror in the Middle East, and if we'll be more specific, Sunni-Shiite conflict. As we know, the Sunni-Shiite conflict is one of the longest conflicts in the Middle East. I think the number of days in wars and the fighting inside the Islam is more than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think is much better, much more. The purpose of this panel is not only to discuss the sources of the conflict, but explain how it is expressed in the Middle East. I think if we take three areas represented in this conflict, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, in each these areas, Sunni and Shiite organizations are fighting each other. In conflict, the goal is not only religious, I mean the question of the leadership of Islam, but also political. But while the Shiite bloc led by Iran and its allies, Syria and Hezbollah, is unified bloc, the Sunni bloc is divided. It consists of two leadership. The first is Saudi Arabia. I think is a moderate Islam, and the other Turkey is radical Islam. To discuss this conflict, I asked the three experts involved in the Islamic organization to explain their point of view regarding this conflict. The first speaker is Professor Boaz Ganor, who will talk about ISIS, Daesh, the most important terrorist organization among the Sunni. The second is Yoram Schweitzer, who will talk about Iran and Hezbollah. And the last speaker is Dr. Michael Harari, who will explain how this conflict reflects in Yemen. Each speaker will speak about 20-25 minutes, and then we have discussion. First speaker is Professor Boaz Ganor, and he's, I think he's going to speak about terrorism transaction, ISIS as a case study.
Yes, thank you very much. Should I start?
Sure.
Actually, you don't need to share anything because I'm sharing from my computer. So just stop the share and I will take it from there. Okay. Do you see it?
Okay, I said about Professor Boaz Ganor is the founder and the executive director of the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, ICT, and the Roland Lauder Chair for Counter-Terrorism at the Interdisciplinary Center, IDC, Herzliya, Israel. Previously, Professor Ganor served as Dean of the Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy and Strategy at the IDC. Okay, please, Professor Ganor.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to your international conference. It's a pleasure being with you. Unfortunately, due to the corona crisis, we need to do it in a hybrid manner, but it's better than nothing. So I feel as if I'm with you now in the beautiful Galilee, and I would like, as you've mentioned, to refer to one case study among a few others, and this is the case study of ISIS. And we decided to call my presentation Terrorism in Transition, because terrorism practically is an evolving phenomenon. It's changing all the time. That's what makes, in my view, terrorism as a phenomenon very interesting subject matter, because whatever you know about terrorism today, it's not necessarily what will happen tomorrow or what would be the need of knowledge for tomorrow. And I think that ISIS is a very interesting case study of the transition and the evolution of modern terrorism, and with specifically in global jihad, Sunni terrorist activity. And this is why the organizers chose that subject matter as a subject for my presentation. But when we are talking about ISIS, we need to start even before the creation of ISIS. We need to start our overview and our discussion practically in a war. And I refer to the war in Afghanistan between the Soviets, USSR, and the local Mujahideen, Islamists that fought against the communist regime in Afghanistan for approximately 10 years, a whole decade. During that period of time, the embryonic structure, I would say, of global jihad as a whole, that after all gave birth to a different variant. We are talking about variants today, different variants of organizations, all started back then between 79 to 89 in Afghanistan. And during this war, you had the local Islamists, the Afghan Mujahideen, later to become Taliban groups that actually fought against the local regime that was supported with or by the USSR. But they also had a lot of support coming from abroad, coming from all the Muslim world. And those were foreign fighters. We know about foreign fighters that came to much later to Syria and Iraq. But the phenomenon of foreign fighters joining the fight of those Islamists against the, if you wish, crusaders, against the enemies, against anybody that doesn't respect their variation of Islam, started way before the recent decades. It started, or it was manifested between 79 and 89, and you saw Islamist jihadist activists, Muslim Brotherhood members and Salafists and other coming to Afghanistan, getting basic training by the training bases that the Mujahideen and later on Al-Qaeda built there, and then joining the fight against the USSR troops and against the government troops altogether. They were very consistent, very determined, and they won the war. In 1988, practically the USSR decided to evacuate, to withdraw from Afghanistan, and the Taliban practically was the ruler of the Afghan territory. But during this decade, we saw the creation of Al-Qaeda, based on the ideological concepts of Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood leader of Palestinian origin. He's not, he was referring to himself to much more than just a Palestinian, but he was the ideologist that actually took the ideology into the praxis. And Osama bin Laden came with his extensive fortune, and he materialized those concepts into the creation of Al-Qaeda. It's also interesting to note that during that time, there was extensive cooperation between some fractions of those Islamists and United States and the CIA. You know, it reminds me that I was invited to give a talk in China, in the Military Academy of China, before the 9/11, 2001. It was somewhere in the year 2000. And I was talking about Al-Qaeda in Beijing back then. And after my lecture, one of the Chinese general raises his hand, and he's saying the following sentence: "My young friend," emphasized the term young, not because he necessarily wanted to congratulate me on my on my age, but practically because he wanted to show that I'm not understanding the phenomenon. And that's what he said, you know, for the last hour or so, you were talking about Al-Qaeda, and you failed to mention the two most important facts that are needed to be said in order to understand this phenomenon. Remember, before 9/11. And I knew where he's leading me, but I fell to the trap with open eyes, and I asked him, okay, so what did I fail to say? He said, the first thing is, who created Al-Qaeda? And I said, okay, who do you think created Al-Qaeda? He said, United States, don't you know it? My answer to him was, no, you are all wrong. It's true that the CIA cooperated, supported with some very negative elements because they fell to the false belief that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And unfortunately, few states are doing those mistakes from time to time, including Israel, by the way. And then you wake up to learn that the enemy of your enemy is the worst enemy of yours. And that's what was their mistake. But then I've asked, and what's the second fact that I failed to mention in your opinion? He said, why did United States create Al-Qaeda? And that took me by surprise, I have to admit. And I said, why do you think United States created Al-Qaeda? The answer was outstanding. He said, in order to attack China. Don't you get it? Now, bear this in mind, very important. Probably we'll talk about the situation right now in Afghanistan. And you can see that China is now developing a very interesting approach towards the new Taliban regime, maybe based on that concept. But I leave it to a later discussion. So what we see in the axis of time, we see the development starting in 79, 89, and then moving on, and the diagram you see in front of you are number of fatalities vis-a-vis milestones in the creation of global jihad. Al-Qaeda became a very popular organization. Many youngsters around the world supported it even before 9/11, definitely after 9/11, it became a model of imitation. And what you saw is individuals, groups, and also terrorist organizations that, that actually turned into and became a proxy of Al-Qaeda. To mention a few, the one which is most important for our discussion, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, that later on gave birth or actually developed to be ISIS. Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, that was some kind of a mutation of GSPC in Algeria, and Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula, that was a combination of two branches of Al-Qaeda, the Yemenite and the Saudis all together. And moving on in the axis of time and now focusing on ISIS, I think that the few very important dates which are needed to be mentioned is 2004, the creation or the evolution of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, a very prominent archi-terrorist that at that time was affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and he was the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And through the years, this was developed up to 2011. It was developed to become the embryonic concept of ISIL. And the difference between ISIS and ISIL is of course, has to do with the concept of the Islamic State in the Levant versus the Islamic State, or later on IS and not ISIS even. Because the ISIS stands for the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. Now, the evolution of the organization, the evolution of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and later ISIL and later on ISIS has a lot to do with the characteristic of the leaders. And I've already mentioned that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was an exception in the arena of international terrorism. He was very knowledgeable in anything that has to do with terrorism. He was innovative. He was very dangerous in any aspect of that. And this is why he was actually killed in 2006. And the one that actually filled in for him was Abu Ayyub al-Masri. For a short period of time, he was also assassinated. And then Abu Omar al-Baghdadi, don't mix it with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, was nominated as the leader of the organization in 2010. He was also, after a short period of time, eliminated. And then another very prominent terrorist, archi-terrorist, should I say, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, took the lead of ISIS. And for 9 years, those were the glorified years of ISIS, and we'll see this in a moment. And he was killed in 2019 when we saw the beginning of the midst of the decline of ISIS, and he was replaced by Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurashi. So our story practically starts, the story of ISIS starts with the concept of the Arab Spring. Actually, before the Arab Spring, as I said, it already was quite well rooted in Iraq, but the interest of ISIS in Iraq, in Syria, started only after the Arab Spring and only after signs of instability and lack of governance started to appear in Syria. And at least if I need to summarize this phenomenon of the Arab Spring, I refer to that as rebellions against traditional regimes that were spreading among few Arab and Muslim countries. In most cases, it started with liberal elements that really wanted to provoke against those traditional regimes and change the regime to be more democratic, maybe even a little bit liberal. But this was taken after a short period of time by Islamist groups that were organized and could do whatever they did. And they toppled down the regime in those countries. The territory, in most cases, became ungoverned territory. The new landlords free archi-terrorists from the prisoners that strengthened them. And they occupied the territory from the government and took the weapons, sometimes even state-of-the-art weapon, and called for foreign fighters to join them. So that process we saw everywhere, but we are now focusing, not everywhere, in quite a few countries, but we are now focusing on Syria because this was the birthplace, Syria and Iraq was the birthplace of ISIS. In those years, starting with the Arab Spring process up to 2015, 2016, what you see is that ISIS, with a very special way of spreading fear and anxiety, I will not get to that right now, actually occupied huge territories in Iraq, in Syria, and unified that to what they refer to as the Caliphate state, the Islamic state that they held. Those were the glorious times. And let me zoom out a minute from the chronological analysis and share a concept that we use in the field of the research of terrorism and counterterrorism. And the concept is a hybrid terrorist organization. I would like to argue that during this specific period of time, ISIS became a hybrid terrorist organization. There are a few examples of hybrid terrorist organizations. Recently, we can refer to Hezbollah as a hybrid terrorist organization, to Hamas as a hybrid terrorist organization. Fatah used to be a hybrid terrorist organization in Lebanon and in Jordan even before that. So the hybrid terrorist organization is a terrorist organization that controls territory and population. And as such, the hybrid terrorist organization is involved in different types of activities. On top of the terrorist activity, is being involved in pseudo-legitimate activities, such as giving services to the people that they control, food supply, water, maybe even law enforcement, education, and so on and so forth. So that type of hybridity, of course, makes the organization more challenging and problematic to deal with. And this organization has another characteristic, which is very, very interesting. The hybrid terrorist organization, by definition, is embedded within the civilian society. Therefore, it's very difficult to deal with an organization like that, and especially if you would like to use military activity, you find yourself with a problem of collateral damage and so on and so forth. Hybrid terrorist organization needs also a lot of money, much more than a regular terrorist organization for those services that I've mentioned before. So they need to get ongoing supply of money. And that's something that was very important to ISIS. Came for many sources. One of them was the oil field that they took over Syria and so if we look at the structure of ISIS as a hybrid terrorist organization during these peak years of the organization, the glorified years of the organization, you could see here in blue the military side of the organization or terrorist side of the organization, and also in red, the concept of governors. They developed different districts, and every district had the governor that controlled all the pseudo-legitimate social activity and taking control and law enforcement in his own district. Now, again, when we are talking about the glory time of ISIS, at that time we see a few interesting processes. First of all, they developed their vision, and their vision was to spread as a global terrorist organization. They didn't want to limit themselves only to Iraq and Syria. That was the big picture, or the goal that they wanted to achieve, spreading to those countries together. And practically, this was done by the fact that different terrorist organizations pledged allegiance to the organization. By the way, some of the organizations that you see here from different parts of the world, before pledging allegiance to ISIS, they gave their alliances to Al-Qaeda, and they just shifted their support from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. So what you see in many cases that Al-Qaeda and ISIS were competing on the same constituency, and they moved from one side to another side altogether. Now, why do I talk about fashion? Because I would like to argue that terrorism is a fashionette business. Like fashion, that sometimes comes new fashion, the old one goes away, sometimes fashion returns. The same thing we see in a retrospective point of view on different types of terrorist organizations and in different parts of the world. By the way, you see those advertisements. Unfortunately, I don't get any support from Coca-Cola, but I've decided to show the Coca-Cola advertisement because they used to use the term, "We are the real thing." By the way, compared to who? Compared to Pepsi-Cola, of course. They are the real thing. That was the mantra that they were using. And when you see the evolution of terrorism globally, you see this concept of we are the real thing. We are the new fashion. We are the real thing. IRA giving birth to provisional IRA, and then to this group which is called real IRA. They are the real IRA, not the old one. PFLP, George Habash organization, gave birth to PFLP GC, which is PFLP General Command. We are the General Command, Ahmed Jibril, and not George Habash, the mother organization. In a way, you can say that Fatah was the mother organization of Hamas, although it's not very accurate, but definitely many people shifted their support from Fatah to Hamas because they saw Hamas as the real thing altogether. But for our concern, ISIS has become the real thing compared to Al-Qaeda. ISIS has become the new fashion, while Al-Qaeda was the old fashion that was seems to get out of history altogether. And then at the peak years of the organization, 2014, 2015, the international community led by United States decided that enough is enough. And they started a campaign at first and then a war on ISIS. In 2014, August 2014, they announced an airstrike campaign in Iraq first, and then the Secretary of Defense and the Chief of Staff declared no less than a war. The United States is at war with ISIS. Soon after that, they declared also campaigns of air bombing on ISIS targets in Syria. Now, words aside and statements, you can refer to them in their place. But when we are checking what really happened during those months of the early time of American war against ISIS, you see that there were about 15 to 20 daily strikes, airstrikes against Syrian facilities. Just to compare, Israel in Gaza, in Pillar of Defense Operation 2011, had 187 daily air bombings there. And you cannot compare the territory of Gaza to the territory that ISIS was holding back then, or in Protective Edge, it was 167 daily strikes. Let me show you this anecdote. This is a statement that was given by the spokesperson of the CENTCOM, the Pentagon, in 23rd of September 2014, and it shows the success, so-called, of airstrike against ISIS facility in Raqqa, the capital of the new state, Islamic State altogether. And he shows, not me, the following picture, before and after. Now, you need to be with a very, very careful eye in order to see what really happened there. You see that the building didn't demolish from the missile attack. Even not one floor was destroyed. A small fire probably on the roof, that's it. And still they showed it as a success. So I asked the question, is this really the way to stop ISIS? And the answer, unfortunately, in that perspective was no, it didn't work. And not I'm saying that, a greater authority than me is saying that. You know who? Hezbollah. This caricature I took from Hezbollah in January 2015. And just look how the American planes are being regarded by Hezbollah as tickling, not more, ISIS altogether. Ineffective whatsoever. So that created a vacuum. And vacuum in the Middle East doesn't stay for a long period of time. The vacuum was filled by the Russians. And the Russians in 2015 declared their war there with their coalition. And there you could see 5,600 airstrikes in a quite limited period of time. And they attacked all the relevant rivalries of Assad regime. And since then, and unfortunately, I would argue that the one who won the war was not United States with its coalition, it was Russia with their coalition, together with Iran, together with Hezbollah, and so on and so forth. And what you could see that through the years 2015, 2016, 2017, 2019, ISIS lost the territory that it gained in the previous years. And what practically happened is that ISIS lost its hybridity. He became a classical terrorist organization. But terrorism is an elusive phenomenon. Think about a balloon, which is not full with air. And when you squeeze in one side, it pops up in another side. When you squeeze the other side, it pops up in between. That's exactly what happened with terrorism. And to explain that, let me go back to an embryonic statement that I would like to share with you. I call it the Formula of Terrorism, very simple mathematical formula. Terrorism is a combination of two factors: motivation, multiple operational capability. When you have a certain group of people that has motivation to conduct terrorist attacks, and it could be various types of motivations. We are talking about Islamist, jihadist, Salafist, global motivation. When you have this and you add to that or multiple that with operational capability, then a terrorist attack or a terrorist campaign would occur. And that's exactly what happened with this organization. Although they lost the territory, they didn't lose the motivation. Supporters all over the world still support the concepts that they share. So the question, and I'm starting to close, the situation that we are facing, going back to the concept of terrorism as a fashionable business, the question I ask myself, it's clear to me that the phenomenon will not disappear. So the question, would the current fashion, i.e. ISIS, will survive? Maybe in a different way, but survive. or the old-fashioned, i.e. Al-Qaeda, will fill in the vacuum that now is being created by ISIS, or a new fashion will take this motivation and create a new organization. We can call it Shmisis for that matter, if you wish. Doesn't really matter. That's a question yet to be seen. We'll see. But if it will be that ISIS will survive, then it might survive as used to be before as a hybrid terrorist organization, create a new state. We'll see where and why. It could be that he will become a classical terrorist organization without controlling territory, just under the intelligence radar, preparing terrorist attacks, sending them to their mission, conducting terrorist attacks. Or it could be what it is right now, an inspiration organization that inspire what we call lone wolves or individuals or local networks, which are not necessarily operational ISIS activists. They were not recruited to the organization, they was not trained, but they are inspired by ISIS to conduct those terrorist attacks. So going back to those three options, the first option is that ISIS will be able to create a new caliphate state. Where and when, that's still a big question mark. We can see where ISIS supporters, ISIS activists are active in 2019. It's not much different today. It could be, as I said, that ISIS will become a classical organization under the intelligence radar without territory, relying mainly on the foreign fighters, returnees that return to the Western countries and actually use them in order to provoke terrorism and violence in their countries, in their homelands. And it could be that ISIS will focus on inspiring local homegrown terrorists, third-generation immigrants, second, third-generation immigrants to conduct those terrorist activities in their region. The last thing I would show you, the last statement is we really don't know which trend will happen with ISIS, but there are at least two unknown factors that will definitely have an impact on one of those trends. One is COVID-19 impact, that it's still very difficult to predict how it would impact the process. And also, as we see today, the Taliban taking over Afghanistan would also have its own impact on the development of the new breed, if you wish, of ISIS. Thank you.